Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on our authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
I think you're starting. Introduce yourself.
Hello.
I don't think anybody's going to talk.
No. Hello, Red. Yes, I can read it. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. This is my first time on Storytellers, so I won't be as polished as most speakers are. My name is Kenny Sad Papaw Harmon. The nickname Sad Papaw I received in 2016 when my granddaughter, Kelsey Harmon, posted a tweet about her papaw that had cooked a dozen burgers for 6 grandkids and only 1 grandkid showed up. This is the photo right above my hat that was posted on Twitter. I'm on here tonight to talk about at least one of my books, Sad Papaw's Heritage. That's my Grandpa Harmon on the cover. And that's when he was in boot camp in World War I. My books are about American history. I love history of several types. The history that are in my books especially the first book, the Heritage book, is about my family. When they were living in Kentucky in the mid 1800s, the book actually begins in 1844 when my great grandparents were dating. And the book runs up into the 20th century, up into the 1930s, 1940s. And there's a lot of family stories and some American history and American characters that most of you have heard about. But the books are very interesting. The first book, like I said, is mostly about pioneer history and my family. I'm looking forward to questions from any of you concerning the Sad Papaw story or any of the books. Sad Papaw's Heritage. You can tell I'm real good with this camera deal. Sad Papaw's Heritage. Wrong book. There we go. Sad Papaw, the early years. That's me when I was 2 years old. That's been a little while ago. And we're going to get this in a minute. Here we go. The third book. Those were the days. We've got a question about, can I tell you more about the book? As I stated a minute ago, the book begins in 1844 when my great-grandparents were dating. And the book tells about their lives. I believe they had 11 children. Their lives in Kentucky, in the very southern part of Kentucky around Williamsburg. For you that aren't familiar with that area, that's the Daniel Boone part of Kentucky. In fact, one of my ancestors was a good friend of Daniel Boone. The book begins in 1844 and runs up into the 1930s and 1940s into the Great Depression. Hello, Marco. I received the inspiration for the book when I was contacted by a writer from Pittsburgh in 2016. She asked me if I wanted to do a book, that she'd be glad to help me. The first thing I thought of was my family, because I knew Grandpa was in World War I, and I knew my great-grandpa was a very interesting character from some of the stories I've heard about him. So that's the only thought I had as far as a book is concerned. I never thought about anything else for book number one other than my family heritage. And I know a lot of people are interested in American history concerning pioneer history, the travels that people made from Alabama, Ohio, as they traveled westward to Arkansas, Kentucky, Kansas. Here I am live. Fairgore 1921. How are you? Hello, Myra. The history of Thanksgiving. Well, it's in the book, but I don't remember what the book says about Thanksgiving. But the history of Thanksgiving is in Sad Papaw's Heritage. There's it tells about the Harmons, how they celebrated different holidays, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and several other holidays. There's 4 recipes in the book I only remember the name of one of them. It was a chess pie, CHESS. The menus talk about the big meals that the Harmons had during certain holidays. I hope that answers your question about Thanksgiving. And hopefully there's a lot of people that are interested in pioneer history. The stories of my family are what a lot of families went through. A lot of families. Tyrone. Well, Papa wasn't exactly sad. The night that we had the cookout at my house, my granddaughter didn't really know what was going on, and I didn't know what was going on either. As it turned out, one of my sons forgot to tell his kids about the cookout the evening of March 16th, 2016. So there was 3 of the grandkids didn't even know about the cookout at my house. And after the story went viral, I got the nickname of Sad Papaw. But what Kelsey wrote on the tweet indicated that I was sad, but I actually wasn't, because she was there. And that's always a good deal when one of the grandkids is around. Thank you, Tyron, for the question. Fairgoer 19201. And the question is, what made you decide to write the books? As I said earlier, not long after the Sad Papaw story hit social media, I was contacted by a writer from Pittsburgh, Charlotte Hopkins. And Charlotte told me she was a writer, and if I ever wanted to do a book, to let her know. I started thinking about it, and one of the first things I thought about was my family, Grandpa in World War I, and some of the stories that were told about Great Grandpa before they moved to Oklahoma. So it was an easy decision for me to start writing the first book. Before the first book was finished, I realized that there was too much for one book, and that's when I decided to make it a book series. And to this date, we have 3 books. The first 2 are basically about my family and myself. I like to write about the 50s and 60s, my favorite time, all that was going on back then. And the third book is more diversified, about World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, and quite a few of the things that were going on in movies, television, TVs back in the 1950s and 60s. I hope that answers your question about why I decided to write the books. For everyone that's not familiar with the Sad Papaw story, I think you should Google Sad Papaw. Now, some of the things that happened during the first few weeks of the Sad Papaw story in 2016, some of those stories are written in detail in 2 of the books, but it was, to say the least, a very interesting part of my life, March of 2016, for the next year or so after that. But I encourage everyone that's not familiar with the Sad Papaw story to Google Sad Papaw and read about it. Marco, hello, Marco. Marco wants to know more about the Great Depression. Well, my family, my grandpa, grandma, and my dad lived through that. My dad doesn't have a lot of memories about it, but it was quite a time. It started when the stock market crashed in October of 1929, and that just threw the economy into a huge tailspin. Many businesses went out of work. There wasn't much work for anybody. And that lasted basically until the beginning of World War II. For at least 10 years, America was in the Great Depression. In my part of the country, in Oklahoma, to make the Great Depression even worse, there was the Dust Bowl. My books talk a little bit about the Dust Bowl, some of the things that went on. My dad, when he was alive, he told me of a few incidents, things that were, how bad it was during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. And it was a very, very difficult time. For those who've never heard about the Great Depression, they need to read about it. Very interesting, very difficult times, very difficult. We went from the roaring 20s, that was prosperity over nearly the entire country, to instant depression, instant economic collapse. The 1920s were so much different than the 1930s. I hope that helps you out, Marco. Indigo, hello. The question is, do you want each book to stand on its own, or are you trying to build a body of work with connections between each book? The first two books are connected because of most of the first two books are about myself and my family. The third book is a different type of book. It's more diversified. There's still some more sad Papaw stories, but there's sports heroes, quite a bit about sports in the 1950s and 60s. If you like the New York Yankees back in the days of Mickey Mantle, Yogi Berra, Whitey Ford, you'll like the book. And there's a story about the 1958 championship game between the Giants and the Baltimore Colts for the NFL championship. That was the game that kind of put the NFL on the map. And the third book has some NFL history, including Jim Thorpe, who was probably the greatest athlete of all time. But the first two books are connected. If you read one, you really should read the other. The third book, not so much. It's a diversified history. If you like things about World War II, stories about that, Korean War, Vietnam. If you like stories from the 50s and 60s, movies, TV, drag racing, I was a drag racing nut in the 60s. There's some good drag racing photos and stories in there. I hope that helps you out, Indigo, on your question. We've got Fairgoer 19207. The Vietnam War was a very difficult time. If you could take Vietnam out of the 1960s, the 1960s would have easily have been the best decade in American history, but of course you can't. Vietnam was in the news daily, constant. I was 15 when we really got involved in Vietnam. It really got started in 1965, and then the draft came in, and all the high school boys were concerned about being drafted and have to go over there in the jungles of Vietnam. So it was a difficult time, but at the same time, for teenagers like me, it was, if you wasn't worrying about Vietnam, you could really have a good time. That's when television was great, movies were great. It was party time on the weekends. It was a wild time in America, especially around where I lived. Well, the third book was the most difficult. I had a lot of help with the first book because I had cousins that had researched our family. So we had a real good base to begin with the first book, the Heritage book. Had a lot of good help with that book from my cousins. But the third book was definitely the most difficult because I wanted everything to be exact concerning the numbers. And anytime you deal with sports, the numbers have to be exact. And the Pacific War during World War II, I wanted all those statistics to be exact. So it took a lot of research. I got nearly all my information from Wikipedia, all the details of several battles on the Pacific Islands. And book number 3 was definitely the most difficult to write because there was so much research involved. I hope that answers your question, Indigo. But basically, the 3 books run from 1844 to the early 1970s. All American history. Most of it's about me or my family. But it's the 3 books are basically 125 years of American history, especially in Oklahoma. And one thing that I wanted to do with my books, I've got enough confidence in the books that the books are going to be guaranteed. They come with a full guarantee, money back if you don't like the books. You just have to send me an email and you'll get a full refund when you return the book. We got Fairgore 1921. No, I don't have any diaries. I guess the closest thing I've got to a diary was in 1941 when Grandma Harmon was the bookkeeper of a local general store. That general store was owned by one of my grandpa's brothers here in the little tiny community of Dibble, Oklahoma. So I think that's probably the closest thing I've got to a diary of any of my family. But that when we found that was very interesting for all of us. I don't know how Grandma managed to work at that general store when she had so much to do at home. Grandpa had hired hands during the Great Depression, and she was cooking for her 2 family members, Grandpa and my dad, and she was cooking for hired hands. And she had a little garden. So I was really surprised when my dad told me about Grandma working part-time at the country store half a mile away. I hope that answers your question about any diaries. And the next question, so how certain are you when it comes to each and every character's journey or experiences? Well, I guess you're talking about authenticity. And what I'm going on is what my cousins have come up with and the stories that my dad told me about our ancestors. So I'm very confident. There was one story. One of Grandpa's brother's mother-in-law was a sister of one of the outlaws that ran with the Frank and Jesse James gang. And that's how we knew that my great-grandpa was quite a character. Because apparently he was running with those same folks, the James gang and those other people that were in Missouri and other places terrorizing during the 1860s and 1870s. Okay, I don't see another question. But as I said earlier, the books are guaranteed. Anybody that doesn't like one of the books, there'll be a return address for the books to be returned, and there will be a full refund. And I hope everyone that doesn't know about the Sad Papaw story will Google and read about Sad Papaw. The Harmons come from, thank you for the question, Fairgore 2080. Where are the Harmons descended from? Whitley County, Kentucky. That is right on the border of Tennessee and Kentucky. Whitley County. And I believe the town, there was a couple of towns. One was Williamsburg. And that part of Kentucky was the Daniel Boone part of Kentucky. I went to Williamsburg to go out there to see some of my ancestors 3 years ago and have a book signing. And I had never been to Daniel Boone National Forest. That's a beautiful place. Anybody that's in southern Kentucky and Whitley County should, if you're in that area around Corbin or Williamsburg, try to go to the Daniel Boone National Forest. You'll like that. And there's still Harmons in that area. And my great-great-grandma was a Creekmore. It sounds like a Native American name to me, Creekmore. There's still Creekmores and Harmons in Whitley County. Hello, Myra. It took more than 3 years to finish the books. We started in 2016, probably July, August, and we finished in April of 2020. I believe that's close to 4 years. It took quite a while. There's a lot of work, a lot of research. Anybody that's seriously considering writing a book, you need to give it a lot of thought. And you need to talk to authors before you start to invest. There's a lot of work involved and quite a bit of money. Quite a bit of money. But if you like the subject that you're working on, it really helps the time. Time will go by if you're working on something that you really like. And I like history. My books were very interesting for me to work with. Long hours. It's time to wrap it up. I hope everyone enjoyed what I had to say. And until next time, goodbye, good evening, God bless you, God bless America, from Kenny Sad Papaw Harmon. Thank you.